What if one of the most powerful ways to change your experience of life requires doing almost nothing at all? No new technology, no special talent, no expensive equipment, just sitting still. At first, that sounds ridiculous. Human beings have built skyscrapers, mapped the genome, landed machines on other planets, and connected billions of people through invisible networks. Yet some researchers have spent decades studying what happens when a person closes their eyes, pays attention to their breathing, and remains there for a while. Why? Because something strange appears to happen when the mind stops running on autopilot. Most people assume meditation is about relaxation, soft music, incense, escaping stress, maybe even spirituality. But that explanation turns out to be far too small. The more scientists began measuring the brain during meditation, the more they discovered that this practice may be doing something deeper. Not removing thoughts, not creating happiness, not turning people into enlightened sages. Training attention itself. And attention is not a small thing. Attention determines what becomes your reality. Think about an ordinary day. A notification appears on your phone. A comment irritates you. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A coworker sends a message that feels slightly disrespectful. None of these events physically force you into a particular emotional state. Yet many of us know how quickly a single moment can hijack an entire afternoon. One thought becomes 10. One annoyance becomes a story. One story becomes a mood. Then the mood begins making decisions. This is where the science becomes interesting. When researchers observe the brain at rest, they often see activity in a network known as the default mode network. Despite the name, rest is not exactly what is happening. The brain begins wandering. It revisits memories, imagines conversations, predicts problems, replays mistakes, and constructs possible futures. In moderation, this ability is useful. It helps us plan, learn, and imagine. But it can also become the source of endless mental noise. You may recognize it immediately. The argument you replay in the shower, the embarrassing moment from 10 years ago that suddenly returns at midnight, the future disaster that exists nowhere except inside your imagination. Meditation appears to interact with this process in a fascinating way. Instead of following every thought wherever it wants to go, attention is repeatedly brought back to a chosen anchor. The breath, a sound, a sensation, a point of focus. The thought appears, attention drifts, then attention returns, again and again and again. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. Inside the brain, a skill may be forming, not the ability to completely stop thinking. The ability to notice thinking and control it. That distinction changes everything. Researchers using EEG, a technology that measures the brain's electrical activity, have observed shifts in brainwave patterns during certain forms of meditation. Different frequencies are associated with different states of consciousness. Some are commonly linked to active problem solving. Others appear more often during relaxed awareness, creativity, or deep sleep. What caught attention was not that meditators entered some magical state. It was that experienced practitioners sometimes displayed patterns associated with calm alertness while remaining fully awake and aware. A curious combination: relaxed but not asleep, focused but not tense, present but not distracted. Most people spend their lives bouncing between extremes, exhausted and unfocused, alert but anxious, resting but mentally racing. Meditation seemed to suggest another possibility. But if that were the whole story, celebrities, executives, athletes, and artists would probably not have adopted the practice so widely. People as different as Steve Jobs, Ray Dalio, Oprah Winfrey, Madonna, Jerry Seinfeld, and members of the Beatles publicly spoke about meditation at different points in their lives. The interesting question is why individuals operating in such different worlds kept returning to the same practice. Perhaps because attention and self-control are valuable everywhere. In business, in creativity, in relationships, in decision-making, in suffering. Now put this inside a real-life situation. You receive an email that changes your plans. Maybe it threatens a project you care about. Maybe it creates uncertainty about money. Maybe it feels unfair. The emotional reaction arrives almost instantly. Your heart rate shifts, your muscles tighten, your thoughts accelerate. Meditation does not prevent that reaction. This is important. Many people imagine meditation as emotional armor, a way to become unaffected by life. That is not what makes it interesting. The interesting part is what happens next. Can you notice the reaction without immediately becoming it? Can anger exist without controlling your next sentence? Can anxiety exist without writing the next chapter of your life? Can fear exist without making every decision? One way to understand meditation is that it trains the space between stimulus and response, a tiny space, often invisible, yet entire lives can unfold differently inside it. Here's where the perspective becomes uncomfortable. Most of us know what it feels like when other people are controlled by their emotions. The friend who explodes over something small, the partner who turns one disagreement into a week-long conflict, the stranger online who reacts before thinking. We see those situations clearly. What is harder to see is how often we do the same thing. Not because we are bad people, because being carried away by our internal weather feels normal when it is happening. Meditation can create an unusual form of honesty. It reveals how much activity was already there. The impatience, the restlessness, the craving, the self-criticism, the stories, the fears. Not because meditation creates them, because silence removes some of the distractions that normally hide them. Ironically, this is one reason many people quit. The first encounter with stillness is not always easy. Sometimes it is also revealing. Yet long-term research has suggested that regular meditation may be associated with improvements in emotional regulation, stress management, attention, and overall psychological well-being. Some studies have even explored possible relationships with healthy aging and cognitive resilience. Science is still investigating many of these questions. There is no miracle, no guarantee, no universal outcome, but the overall picture is difficult to ignore. Again and again, researchers find evidence that the brain remains more adaptable than we once believed. Neural pathways change, patterns change, habits change, attention changes. The person experiencing life is changing too, not because reality became easier, because their relationship to reality became different. And perhaps that is the most surprising discovery of all. For centuries, people treated meditation as a spiritual practice. Then modern science arrived with scanners, electrodes, data sets, and laboratory measurements. Many expected the mystery to disappear. Instead, a different mystery emerged. Why does training attention seem to influence so many parts of human experience? Why does learning to observe and silence thoughts alter the way we relate to emotions? Why does a skill that appears passive from the outside produce measurable changes on the inside? The answers are still unfolding. But one possibility stands out. Maybe freedom is not primarily about controlling the world around you. Most of life will never obey your preferences. Markets crash, relationships change, people disappoint you, plans fail, bodies age, unexpected things happen. The external world remains stubbornly independent of your wishes. Yet another kind of freedom may exist. The freedom that comes from not being pulled in every direction by every passing thought, impulse, fear, distraction, headline, notification, or emotional storm. Not because you eliminated them, because you learned to meet them differently, to regulate your mood, to stop the loop in your mind. Meditation may not solve your problems, but if it helps you remain steady when life refuses to cooperate, then it is doing something far more valuable than helping you relax. It is helping you become less dependent on circumstances for the state of your own mind. And in a world constantly competing for your attention, your reaction, and your emotional energy, that might be one of the rarest forms of power a human being can develop. Lucid Order. Question everything.